pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I would entertain a motion to approve the agenda.
I'll make a motion to approve the agenda.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
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 Aye. Aye. Motion carries 5-0. With that, I'll have entertain a motion for the consent agenda. Is there
I'll make a motion to approve the consent agenda.
I'll second.
any discussion on any of the items there or questions?
I did have a question on just the special education handbook. Do we have any policies that would potentially contradict anything in there? Or I noticed a section that said it overrides like something, but I didn't know.
We shouldn't, and the reason for that handbook has to do with some of the federal funding. So with this last round of ESSER funding, we received some that's special ed specific. And part of the requirements with that is to have the board go ahead and approve this handbook following those guidelines. And so this assures that we're following the assurances with the state.
Okay, it seemed pretty clear. Like, I feel like it actually will make things a little bit easier just because it defines a lot of the terms that may be more ambiguous or not.
And best practice is to have approval of that every year anyway, of
Okay.
the special ed handbooks.
Have we had a special ed handbook before?
Not that we've had board approved.
Okay, so there's just been stuff, but nothing. Okay.
And then going along with that is follow-up training with the
Yes.
special ed department.
Yeah. And that has already started.
Perfect.
Is this the same type of handbook? Like, do parents have to sign off like on our student staff handbooks that they go through? Like, or is this more for staff,
This would be more for staff.
just for
specifically,
training
Just our processes and things that we follow.
when they write like their IEPs and things like
There's
that?
parts of this that obviously during those meetings are shared with parents, but the handbook as a whole
Is written towards staff. Okay.
And this particular one has all of the COVID requirements when, if they're going to be out of classroom for any kind of
The
virtual learning, it
accommodations.
has all of that kind of detail in there. So it's a good, helpful
Okay.
piece for us.
Will that help prevent them? I know they previously, like last year, they had a ton of extra paperwork trying to modify those plans and trying to get them. Will this help alleviate that so they don't have to redo them? They can just, or not.
necessarily.
okay. I didn't know, like, would they make it so that there's a caveat on there? Okay, awesome. That was the only question I had.
Anybody else? All those in favor say aye.
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 Aye. Motion carries 5-0. With that, we'll move into discussion items. And for this month's good news story, we actually have two good news, one more recent and one we've been working on since last summer. So I'll start with you, Lisa, and you can share with us
Sure. I
the
would love
super
to.
good news.
It is, it's wonderful news. So this last summer, the federal government came out with some, it was called ECF funding, Emergency Connectivity Funding. Nick Davis, our technology director, was able to get us on top of that, and we as a district were able to submit for that grant, which means we asked for 4,350 new Chromebooks, and we received the funding, 1.7 million, to replenish our Chromebooks. And so
1.7.
Nice job.
yeah, 1.7 million. And so we received that funding. Part of the reason we were eligible to receive it is because we started our one-to-one so long ago that ours needed refreshed, whereas most districts weren't able to apply because they just started their one-to-ones with COVID. And so we really just fit the mold and we came through successfully on that. So Nick, Alicia Krantz worked hard this summer to make sure that we were able to get that in, so.
Cool.
That's cool.
And
Especially
Lisa
long-term.
helped too, so she
I'm
wouldn't
sure
say that about
she knows
herself at
writing
all. but
things,
that-
yes, yes, good job.
I just appreciate our administration staying on top of those things because
It helps.
you're making more work for yourself when you do it. And then when you win it, it's
Well, and that just means that those technology funds that we would have been setting aside to make those replacements are now available for other things as well. So that's helpful.
Is that like a one-time purchase that are gonna come at once, or is that a rolling, like over the next few years, we'll get them and phase them out as we need them, or we get them all now but only use them as we need them?
It's more difficult to answer than that, but the E-rate funding side of it, which provides us, that gives us a time frame, and so we'll kind of spread that out as far as we can, thinking of the longevity to ensure that we're still phasing them in, so it doesn't all expire once again. So we're gonna look at different options as we look at what the E-rate funding actually tells us we have to do.
Okay,
Still staying in those requirements. The other thing is, just because of the shortages with everything right now, if we can get them and get them in our hands, we'll order them and get them as soon as we can.
awesome.
Good idea.
Good. That's awesome. Great news.
And then our other good news, Pam, you want to share?
I just want to thank the community for coming out last night for Lucas Bike Candy, for the Bike Candy family. I appreciate the staff that was there, that took the time to open that up. We almost had a circle the size of the football field of community members that came on behalf of that family. So it was really a pretty cool sight to see our community come together for a family. So,
Want to get a little insight on his cancer battle or?
they said he was improving. Last night they announced that he was improving, but it's cancer. So keep praying.
2 years in this battle, so.
Yeah.
With that, we'll move into your section.
Okay.
Give us a little update on the.
Yep.
Attendance and superintendent short, or the
Yeah.
superintendent short.
I hope not. No, I wanted to just touch bases, send out the report in the packet and was attached in terms of our attendance and such. You can see, I'll start with attendance. As you start into that, I'm just gonna bring my file up here. For some reason it's not wanting to load my graphs, but I'll go from the other graph. The attendance, you can see we did back earlier, well, in late September, we had that significant dip at the alternative school. We were really close to wanting to close that, and we held off. We said it's kind of that 50% range is what we were saying. If we dip below that, that's when we'll go. But that rebounded, and it was a series of students that either were COVID positive there at the school, and thus other students that came in contact had to go home, or there were a number of them that had COVID cases in their homes. And so they didn't even come to school. They just had to stay home. And so that was one piece to that. And then for all of the other schools outside of the alternative school, which is always lower, the alternative school attendance is always a lower attendance rate than the other schools. But the other schools have been consistent where they're at. I mean, tiny fluctuations here and there, but for the most part, overall, we've been hovering right around 90%. That's actually better than a lot of our surrounding school districts in terms of the attendance that we're seeing. We have some of our elementary schools that have been hitting as high as 94% attendance. So that portion of our attendance is actually doing quite well. It is traditionally, and just I mentioned this last month, but traditionally the attendance is, you're looking at 94 to 96% range. And so the fact that we're down in the 90s is still lower. I mean, we're still telling students to go home or stay home. If you've got, some of the symptoms, stay home, even if you haven't been tested, just to make sure we can keep ourselves in school. And so that's where a lot of that comes in. And so even with that 90%, there is still, there's a higher push on some of our teachers because, it doesn't equalize itself throughout the district. And so you have patches where some teachers will have a number, maybe 10 or 15 of their kids gone. And so for that class, there's a lot of extra work for those teachers. So we are trying to find ways that we can help those teachers in those situations. But the other problem and the biggest thing that we're facing right now is our teachers that have to stay home for one reason or another. And not all of these absences of teachers are related to COVID, but it certainly has increased as a result. And so what we're seeing on that report, let me see if I can get that part up right here. That substitute report is kind of an indicator of what we're seeing in terms of the number of our teachers that are missing. And that what we're really facing is because we have so many teachers out, and when I say teachers, I'm including our aides and, our instructional staff are out, we can't find enough subs to fill all of those positions. And so when on the report that you have that's linked, you'll see some days that there are, if there's 30 total teachers and aides that are missing that day, we sometimes are only able to fill 70% of those. And so you'll have, 5 to 8 positions in the district that are not being filled. And in some cases, the principals are choosing not to fill the position. It's one that it's not a one-on-one aid. What it means is that teacher or the students don't have that support that day from an EA. In other situations, what we're doing is we have created a program that allows our teachers and classified staff to be paid to do things on their prep. Or if they're doing, some of our aides are there half a day, and maybe they'll stay for the other half to help out in some of these classes. And then we pay them extra for doing some of those things that, a lot of them, the teachers and aides would have done it for free anyway, that just to help out, because could I cover something on my prep? But it's being asked so frequently, we felt like we needed to do something there. So we have a lot of our teachers and aides stepping up and being willing. I know a lot of the secretaries will send out emails saying, anybody willing to help us out, here's where we're needing help today. And they're filling that on a daily basis.
Is there anything that the community can do to help?
Just having more people willing to sub. I mean, that's really what it comes down to. And it's not particular to our community.
Right.
It's everywhere. The subs are hard to come by. And I mean, I know there are a lot of places where even here, some of our administrators are stepping in and being the librarian for the day or things like that. So the real thing is just encouraging those that would be willing to substitute to come and get signed up to substitute.
And just as a reminder, what are the requirements for somebody from the community to be in a position to do that? Because you can't just walk in, right?
You're right. Well,
Right, if you come in, we do have to run a background check, and then fill out the application and just work through some of those hiring processes with us. And so we'll walk them through if they just want to come visit the district office and do those.
And that takes typically how long, would you say?
Less than 30 minutes for the initial meeting.
Okay, and then the background check to be from meeting
Depends on the
to,
state,
okay.
but we can work through processes with them to try to expedite that, yeah.
I know we'd had a conversation prior about trying to get the teachers or anyone who might even possibly think they wouldn't be there the next day to submit earlier to get those in.
right.
Have we had any luck with that?
I mean, it's hard to know if that's helped. We have had more teachers doing that, but we're not necessarily seeing a change because of that.
Okay.
What we're seeing, I mean, it's really staying pretty consistent around that 30 to 35% in some cases, most recently, that are going unfilled. And that's consistent. I had a meeting with other superintendents in the region, and those numbers, Valley View, Nampa, Caldwell, all had the same percent unfilled.
Would it be cost effective for us to have the conversation or consider hiring permanent subs if we could get 2 or 3 that are just willing to, just always, they're going to come to work every day. They don't know where we're going to put them, but we will find a spot for them for the rest of the year? Or is that not?
I think it could help if we're finding some of those subs that are choosing, they're sometimes here in Middleton and sometimes somewhere else. If we could say, hey, are you willing, if we paid you a little more or something, or put you on a permanent basis, would you come here every day? I think that would just take a little bit of investigation with our subs to see if there's interest in that kind of because I do think we could do that. Because
I just wondered, even if that gave us 3 that you're just okay, we know we can shuffle these, maybe lighten the load on the administrators a little bit. And then just as we have those other ones.
And usually buildings are pretty good to just like, they have people that they're honed into that are
Yeah.
there on their list
Right,
that they call, so. But,
right. And that's why I'm saying I
and they're
think.
usually used and abused. Sorry.
They really are permanent.
Yes, I would,
Well, that's
they
what,
are
like, if we
fixtures
could,
in the
if we
school,
could
yes.
compensate them for that, like if they're really there that often anyways, if
Well,
we could
and we do, if they're long-term, right? It's more money. You make.
well, that's why I'm wondering. So if we could sign them on as, you know, for this next year, if they'd be willing to take a position.
Would
But I
that be
don't,
with benefits and all of that then?
I don't
if
know.
You did that?
Probably just
No,
contract.
we would just have, if you're here for a certain number of days, then it's at a different rate. Right now, the problem with the long-term, and Lisa, correct me if I'm wrong, but the long-term is if you're doing long-term in one position.
Okay,
Is that correct? How we,
That's correct.
okay.
yep,
So what we would have to do is change it so that if you were doing it consistently over this many days, we'll bump up the rate that, and I think that's something that we could
Which if
easily.
they're the ones that are there all the time
Oh,
anyways, then
there
at
are,
least they
right?
can get
yeah.
compensated.
And then just going back, high school diploma or GED trustee Nancy as well.
Yes.
Any other questions on that? Those are the main pinch points that we're seeing right now. As far as the number of cases, we're seeing a gradual decline in the number of overall cases that we're seeing. There were, the way that the reports run at the end of each week, it kind of drops off because you get 3 days of
Yes,
people
recoup, yes.
able to come back. So we typically will see that drop off at the end of each week and then pop up a little bit at the beginning and then drop, consistently throughout the week. And so that's been consistent, but we are seeing a decline there. There was a chart that I put in that was projected incident cases in the county. And that was delivered by our Southwest District Health folks. And that gives an indication that it looks like we're nearing that peak. The gray area within that chart is the area that it still could find its way into, depending on how things go. But that was delivered by Southwest District Health. So anyway, we're going to just continue to look, work on ways to try and encourage people to come and sub, and then hopefully we'll get past this surge of COVID and we can start encouraging more towards the attendance side, because it's hard when we say stay home if you've got a sniffle, because we don't want you to come and possibly infect, when normally it would be okay for you to come and do that. So once we get to that point, we can work through the scenarios there.
Just one last question back to subs. Trustee Dempsey had mentioned the governor had allotted additional money specifically for substitutes.
Right.
Have we already received that, or do we know what our portion is? Are there strings attached to that funding?
I can speak to that. The half of the money has come. For our district, it accounted to about $60,000
that's right.
that came. And we're using that for covering the aides and the teachers covering for one another.
Oh, for that program, okay.
That program is being paid out of there. You can actually use it to help with the classified salaries so that you don't have as many unfilled positions. So we've been using that for some of that increase that we gave to the classified, we can pull from there. Additionally, we started the year with an increase in our sub rate, and so we can pay for that with those funds. And then the second half will be determined based on how the first half is used.
Okay.
And so they're going to be watching, and we've been working with Mrs. Krantz to make sure that we've got all of our reporting in on time so that they know how we're using it. Because if we can show that we've used it, essentially the word is, if you can show that you're using it, then it'll come back to you at least that much, because they gave half.
Okay.
But if there are people out there that aren't using it, then that might increase the amount for those that are on that second half. And that should come mid-November, that second half.
Thank you.
Other questions or comments on that?
I just want to say thanks to you and Glenn for keeping the academy open. Because when we shut it down, it's hard to get those kids to come back. And I know Glenn, I mean, it's like, so just keeping that flow going that they're coming in. I know if we shut it down, it's hard to get them all back. They get jobs. So thank you for that.
Well, and that same shout out would go to those teachers that were willing to fight through such a low. I mean, we were really down towards almost 50% gone that they were dealing with on a daily basis, trying to figure out how to help the kids that weren't there and were there. And so that helps as well. Okay, next item is a discussion of possible upcoming levies bond strategic planning surveys that will be going out. As part of the board packet that you saw, there was the initial draft of kind of the general survey that we would send out. And then today I was able to send 2 additional, one dealing with academics and one dealing with facilities. And we have one more that would be dealing with extracurricular pieces, because all of those are going to have a part in what we put together as a total plan. And I guess the main thing that I would ask of the board is if there were specific, in any of those surveys that you've had a chance to look through, is there anything missing, something more that we need to ask? And we're going to try and keep each of these surveys under 15 questions. But we can mix and match a little bit if we need to, mainly to keep it low so that people don't lose interest and say, this took me more than I thought it was going to take, so I'm not going to answer the rest of these questions. But if we split them up into different places, then people will answer the questions on the things that are important to them. If facilities are important, if extracurriculars, if academics, whatever is the most important to them, or all of them, hopefully. But we just want to make sure, I've sent all of those surveys out to our administrators as well to get a feel for what they're seeing and what they would suggest. Anything from the board as we look at that. And I'll talk about timeline in my evaluation plan, because I've got kind of a timeline listed out there.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, I think something that's really important that we make clear to the community is that there's maybe a misconception, and I'm not sure 100%, that there should be some impact fees coming from the growth in the community, from the contractors building and permit fees and things like that. And there's not.
Right.
Like there is no source of revenue from that. It'd be nice and it should come from that, but it's I don't even think it's legal to do that. So they have to understand that in lieu of those things, the community as a whole carries the burden for that growth.
Right.
And we certainly, we don't want to stick it to anybody, but it's necessary. We have to educate the kids. We want to grow an intelligent community, and we need everybody's assistance. So if we can explain that, I think that's a really important piece that people don't understand.
Yeah, and coming from other states, in other states, it's allowed to do that. And so that's where a lot of those buildings get built in other states. And so I agree. And that was actually one of the points that one of the administrators brought up as well. It was, we've got to make sure that it's clear to people that this is the only way to build a building.
And does federal or the state kick in money too if we get a bond? I think it would be important to let people know, look, we're asking you for this much, but the state's going to kick in this much to help us. So it's not just we want you all your money to build the school, but we are getting some help. So
and the state will give.
If we could clarify that for people, I think it would be helpful.
And I think our bond rating and stuff is still really good, or at least we're like at the top. And do we still qualify for subsidized interest and stuff on those?
There are some of those things we will qualify for, but not, there were about 4 different programs that the school district took advantage of when the high school was built, that some of those were particular just to that time.
Yeah.
And so they're not available now. And so essentially the last time we talked to Piper Jaffray, and Mrs. Krantz helped me, were there 2 of those tools that will still be available?
That's correct.
So there were 2 tools that we can still use. And so explaining that would be.
I think as much information as you can educate them on, this is how it works. This is why we do what we do.
Right, and within,
Verbiage, it's verbiage, I think.
within those surveys, one of the things we've been trying to do, and we'll, as we put the website together, we'll have these surveys listed, but we'll also have these information documents that they can link to in the survey, but they can also just click to from the website that has, it'll be like bonds and levies 101, talking to them about how those work, what it takes to pass those kind of things.
And how they're funded.
And how they're funded and what impact that has on families and things like that. We'll be talking about I had a list of those, the growth. I mean, I think it's important that people have, I think everybody knows we're growing, but I don't think everybody has a full grasp of how much growth and what that impact is on the district. And so Davis Demographics is helping us. I'll be meeting with them this week to get some of those rates. It was, the rate that they used to give was 0.7 per lot. And just a count that I did just the other day of planned lots, there's about 2,600 planned lots right now. And if you've got 0.7 of 2,600, you're almost at a 50% increase in our students over the next 5 to 8 years.
So we did that a couple of years ago, a very thorough one. Do we still have copies of those? I just am curious to see where we match up, because they were very conservative when we had that before in their projections, and they dot plotted everything. I mean, we went as far as like potential boundaries, even when we looked at that study and how many kids per household and what they were figuring. I'm just curious to see if how far out of the water those projections are.
Totally blew that one.
And we do have those
How do you-
reports, but that's what that same report is what Davis Demographics.
So they'll
is
come
doing
back
with
in and
us right now.
recreate that.
Yeah.
Okay.
So they're probably saying that.
It's pretty eye-opening.
I guess I didn't see any question that we asked, like, maybe this number of kids they want to see per class elementary school wise. Do you want us to 22? You want us at 30? Like, give what,
Oh, 24.
I mean, what are the, but understand
Anything
that
after that is
that's
death for a
reflective
teacher.
in, right? So I think
Yeah.
that's,
Right, because, well, we could not build a building, but that means class sizes go up and having an indicate something
Yeah.
that links that. Yes. Okay.
There you go. Are you comfortable with the large class? I don't know.
Other questions or thoughts on any of those surveys? And the way that we're looking at this is we'll keep developing these over the next several weeks. So if you have something, please just go ahead and email me directly and we'll address that.
I appreciate just even the other thoughts that they have. So if it doesn't fit in any of the boxes of the surveys that
Right.
people, I mean, there's a lot of very smart people,
Yep.
definitely smarter than me out there that have creative ideas or experience that I'm just excited to hear their feedback or
Right.
things that
We have
You know.
good demographics. So yes, I
Yeah.
agree.
just very,
Yes.
so to see kind of what
Yes.
things that they could tap into or ideas or experiences they've had other places that we
Right.
might have not know about or have seen or anything.
do we get more money from the state when we go 5A?
Unfortunately, no. That would be
No?
fantastic.
They don't get Kleenex money.
Okay. Well, and like I said, I'll talk timelines on that when we talk my evaluation, that I have some timelines in there. If there's no other questions on that item, I'll move on to the next.
Vans.
Vans. One of the other hitches that we are running into with COVID and the people missing is our busing, our transportation. And they have set a priority, appropriately set a priority that the routes are the first thing. Getting kids to and from school are the most important. And then the extracurriculars, getting them to different things after that are the next priority. But there have been times where some of these routes some of these trips haven't happened, or they've had to go so early. The students on a volleyball team might have to normally have left at 3:30, but because we need that bus driver for the route, they're leaving at 2:30 and sitting because the bus driver takes them to their location, drops them off, and then comes back to be able to run the route.
Wow.
And so there's a number of those kind of things, primarily with our extracurriculars. The routes so far we've been able to fill, they've been stretched really thin, but they filled them.
And that's because they have a shortage of bus drivers.
Correct.
right? Yeah.
Shortage of bus drivers, which has been nationwide
Which-
even
yes.
prior to COVID.
Oh, yes.
It was an issue. So one of the things, a solution that could assist and actually save the district money in the long run is the idea of purchasing a number of the 15-passenger Ford Transit vans. And I'll just speak from past experience in another district that shall not be named. But when we purchased two vans, 15-passenger vans in that district. And I just called them last week. They've put 90,000 miles on those two vans in the last 5 years.
Wow.
Now, if you translated those 90,000 miles to trips that would have had to be done with a bus, and when it's an extracurricular trip, there's a rate that you have to pay, and our transportation has to pay that as well, and that gets passed on to us. That rate that you have to pay is so high, it's almost it was $3.35 a mile at the time, and it's gone up since.
Yeah.
But I calculated based on $3.35, and if we had paid $3.35 a mile instead of just the cost of the fuel, which is the cost when we put the van, those vans cost around $45,000 or so. In that district, they made up for the cost of the vans within the first year and have since saved the district almost $500,000. Now, it would not be as extreme here because the distances that are being traveled in Middleton are not the same as that district. That district has to go a lot further
That's true.
on places. But it would still, those vans would still save time. The main thing is we went through, we were very hesitant about going to vans just because the safety issues that had been on previous versions of these 15-passenger vans that were very high up the axles. They rode high on the axles and had a high profile.
I coached in Caldwell and we had vans and I had to drive them. They were terrible.
Right. The newer vans.
So, but they were nice to have.
Yeah. And
You put your team on there and you go.
Yeah, and you can zip around a lot easier than you can with a bus. But the vans now, they've got airbags the length of the cabin, obviously seatbelts for everybody, lane keeping assistance, backup monitors, cameras. When we did this, we put every safety feature we could in there. And then on top of that, we had a course that anybody who drove the van had to take. And we put a tracker on the vans, which tracked how fast they were going, harsh braking, things like that. So it would come back in real time. I was the one receiving that. And if I saw, it would come up automatically. It's like this van, I don't know who was in it, but this van is going this much over the speed limit. And we would set a speed limit so that, they were never going 80 miles an hour down the freeway. They were going at most 75. But if then anything lower, we were keeping track of that. And again, just to make sure, because when those vans have issues, it's consistently user error, not the van. And so we wanted to make sure that was taken care of. And then if they hadn't gone through that course, they didn't get to drive the van. Their crew were
I believe
whatever.
we had to do the same.
So I put one build and a spec in we'd put a vinyl lettering on there to have it be, it's clear that this is for our extracurriculars and it's helping us, it looks sharp too, as you drive up in something like that. It reflects good on the district, but if we were to go forward with this, we'd put out essentially bids to the different dealers in the valley and give them an opportunity. The word I'm getting, which is not surprising as I've reached out a little bit, I haven't gone too far, but it'll be a while. It's not like they're just turning around that quickly. But if you as a board are comfortable with me moving forward, then there's no decision now except that I'll go forward with the bid process and then come to you next month with a recommendation, and then that would be when it would be
Do
approved.
we have any in our current fleet?
Mhm.
We have one.
What, what
It's
is
an
I'll
old
tell you what my
Dodge.
kids call 'em.
like, what?
I think it's a Dodge. I couldn't even
It's-
tell you.
I think it's a Dodge. I think you're right. It's old. It's an old,
I think-
it's an old guy.
I
Anybody
think most
I
people.
don't
have an
know
idea?
it.
Okay.
I can
would
see
bet-
it. I can see kids in it.
I would bet it's
Team always
15
uses
years
it.
old or more.
Yes.
How
based
many
on-
vans are you looking at?
Right now, I was looking at 2 because
Then
you
we'd
can
have
take a,
three.
you can take, yeah, then we'd have 3, but you can take a team,
Mhm.
with the exception of maybe a football track team,
Yeah.
you could take almost any team with 2 vans.
Yeah.
And so that was kind of what we were looking at was the 2.
The specs on here, it just shows 12 passenger, but we can get them as 15 would be the goal to get 15.
Yeah.
So you were looking at, could we use any COVID money for these because of the shortage? of
Yes,
drivers? So-
and we actually called the state and there have been other districts already that have done
I think it's
similar
great.
things.
Yeah.
And we could use the ESSER dollars to pay for it, but then we'll make up those dollars within time. And
Oh, I
so,
think so.
Well, and where we didn't have to pay
Because
for
we
laptops either, like that technology
paid
money
for
is
the
coming back.
transportation anyway, right? That-
right,
So. okay.
Exactly.
So the expense would be higher not to have the vans in the long run.
in the long
We
run.
Yes.
have an existing fleet of 1 that is probably outdated and
He's
kind
old.
of to that
Probably should
point.
be retired.
Yeah, where it's laws of diminishing returns, we're gonna put more money in keeping it running than
Right.
it's worth, so, okay, I like it.
Because let's see.
Any other
My
questions or concerns with
Would we
moving
be
forward?
better off looking, I mean, do we need 3?
3, that's what I'm kind of think.
If you're gonna go through the bid process and stuff like that, I would, if we've got the old van there that's probably gonna need to be retired,
Right,
then we really wouldn't have 3.
and,
Technically,
I
right,
think you're right,
right.
Garrett. I think you're right.
And you're.
And if we're saving, if we're talking about
Yeah.
others that have saved $500,000, and we're looking
Uses that,
at
but you could
significantly less
take-
purchase.
Yeah, and
Three
it, I
baskets.
mean, obviously you can get probably a little better deal if you're
Yep.
buying 3 versus 2.
Right.
So,
Probably not gonna hit.
I mean, it'd be worth a look.
I can put that out there because we have the funds to be able to do it. And since we'll replenish those
I
funds.
think
Yeah.
that's a good idea,
Yeah,
Garrett.
yeah, it's not
I
about
would
it.
look into 3.
Okay,
The key is kind of, with those ESSER funds are one-time funds, right? So this is a one-time expense.
Yeah,
for these guys, right? So.
Which will just
But
give
this,
back.
but yeah, I was gonna say, the savings is
Back in.
consistent.
But
Well, I
that
think it
also
would-
impacts the non-one-time funds in savings that'll
Yep.
go into our budget to be able to spend on other things.
correct.
It would make sense to do without ESSER funds.
Financially, it makes sense.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay. Any other thoughts or questions on the bands?
No.
Okay,
That's exciting.
we'll move forward on those. Next item is my evaluation, and I just wanted to, that was what I would deliver to you was what's called the Individual Professional Learning Plan, shortened to IPLP when we're talking with the teachers, but every teacher in the district has to create one of these. And we've done it so that the principals all create one as well and to share that with me. And I felt, and this is how I've done it in previous districts, is I felt like my system should be the same as all of their systems. And so what I've put together for you is a recommendation that I would give for, here are the goals that I would suggest that we look at for me over this year. And then we use that compared and together with the other, there'll be a rating that would come at the end of the year that's part of that document. None of that we necessarily need to talk about now, except that there are some criteria there that you would rate me on at the end of the year. But this goal process is a process that we have been working on with all of our teachers and principals. And so felt like as the board is my supervisory group, I think it's important for you to see what my goals are and give input, feedback on any of those. And so if I could, I'd just like to walk through what those goals are. And I don't want to go into all the details, but certainly I can answer any questions that you might have with any of the details. Most of these goals are centered, two of them are centered around our strategic planning process. And that's a big thing. It takes a lot of time but I think it's probably the most important thing we're going to do this year is get that plan in place in a way that we can keep moving forward. So the first goal is to conduct the stakeholder needs assessment, assessing stakeholder perspectives, concerns, suggestions regarding our instruction, facilities, bonds and levies, and extra programming, and to have that done by December 1st. And so the timeline, and that's where the survey timeline comes in, is I would like to plan on having that survey completed or started by the end of the month of October. And then that'll give some time to start receiving some of the feedback for our November meeting, but then for our December meeting, we'll have the full, all of that information available as we start looking at, because December, if we were going to be looking at a supplemental levy, would be the ideal time to decide, just because the deadline is in January. And while we could still do it with that January board meeting and we can still make adjustments, having that decision made in December would be ideal. And so I felt like making sure that we had all of the information at our disposal for a discussion in our December board meeting is the timeline I was wanting to keep with. And so we're constructing right now. We'll deploy the surveys by way, I mean, we'll send that out through our Blackboard system to all the patrons, but we'll put it on our website, we'll put it in the paper, we'll put it everywhere we can put it so that we get as much feedback as possible from our community. And then that analysis will be done prior to board meetings so that I can say, based on what I'm seeing, this is what I would recommend. Any questions on that goal?
Good goal.
Okay. The second goal would be to complete the strategic plan. And that strategic plan would be for 2022, the school year starting the fall of 2022 through the school year starting the fall of 2027. And that's going to include plans for our instruction, all of our academics, our facilities as well. So having a plan of if we're going to shoot for a bond for a building or add on to buildings or anything that we're doing facilities wise, that we have a full plan of this is how we'd like to see this happen in the next 5 years. And so we need to do a needs assessment there. And then starting at the end of this month, beginning of November, I want to start putting committees together to get that some more direct feedback. And the committees are going to be surrounding a whole lot of different topics based on what our survey gets back. And I've started with asking our administrators to give me suggestions of both teachers and parents that they work with that they feel would be willing and able to provide good feedback. It would be good to have at least one board member, if not two, participate in that process outside of board meetings, not so much to make any decisions, but to be able to give feedback, give input based on a board perspective. Obviously can't do more than two to not break open meeting laws. And then to gather all of those and essentially put that a strategic plan together so that by March 1st we know where we're headed for the next 5 years. Questions or concerns on that goal?
So the overall plan between now and March is to survey our patrons, our teachers, our staff, administrators, put that information together, then from that information, set up committees to gather more information from the community, city leaders, and hash that out in committee form. And then from that, figure out what our game plan is going to be from a facility standpoint.
Correct.
So March 1st is our goal, to pull all the community involvement, share that information, take the feedback from them, the leadership from them, what they want in our community, and then develop a plan from that.
Correct. Okay. The third goal, and this is just typically what I've asked my principals to do, is to have a goal that's something designed to help them develop professionally. And one of the things that I wanted to work on, and this is just primarily because it's my first year here in a new area, I just wanted to be as involved as I could be in organizations that deal with our school district that are outside of our school district. So for instance, the SIC is a group there's a group of superintendents from all of those SIC schools. They meet monthly, and the same with IASA in Region 3 that expands it out to even all the smaller schools out in Region 3. So I want to be able to participate in all of those meetings, but then at least one community organization a month, whether that's me going down to the fire commissioners meeting, city council meeting. I've got in touch with the Chamber of Commerce for Middleton, and just making sure that I'm participating with those groups so that more than anything, the school district has a voice. And they know that they can, if they see me sitting at a city council meeting, they know that I'm at least aware of what's going on, and they may be more likely to reach out and say, hey, I saw you at this meeting. What did you think? And if I see something that I want to be able to say, okay, well, this is going to affect the district this way, and I want to be able to have those kind of relationships. So those are, and that's just kind of ongoing throughout the year, but that's what I would like to set as my goal for my own professional growth.
So traditionally in superintendent evaluations, are there KPIs like revolving around academic performance and things like that?
Yes, and that'll be the next,
Okay.
This next piece. It's called the district determined measure. The district determined measure is going to focus on aspects of our academic growth. So what we'll be looking at, all the principals have been setting growth goals in those areas. We're going to try and pull all of that together, and it may end up having to be a goal that's separated by elementary schools and secondary or whatever groups, but those will be specific student performance goals that will center that part around. So that's where that piece comes in. Typically also, in a year that I'm not doing strategic planning, my other goals might be more zeroed in on like English, math, CTE, something to do that. But with strategic planning being such a big part, didn't feel like I could spread myself out that far. So tomorrow, actually, in our district admin meeting, we'll be working on what that district determined measure is, and then I'll forward that out to you as a board. Any questions on those?
This looks great.
Okay, so that would be something that when we get to action items, just to approve that those, that is the IPLP for me as the superintendent. And then the rest of these documents are what you will use when you evaluate me at the end of the year. And so we can talk more about those specifics as we get closer there, but it just gives you kind of the criteria that you can look at for me. Any questions? Any concerns with that being, what I don't want to do is say, here's how you're going to evaluate me, board. I'd rather, if there are concerns with this moving forward, please let me know.
No, I think this collaborative approach is the way to do that. I know we'll have a little bit of input as we go. I also think we can look at and break down, once we kind of get this established too, and say, quarterly, we might have you report on a section of this to give us kind of an update.
Yes.
So as we're flowing through this, it's not all of a sudden on one day we hammer the whole topics.
Right.
We can share them with the community. They can hear our conversation in an open meeting. I think it'll be productive.
I appreciate that it's the same thing that the principals are doing, that the teachers are doing, just because then it gives me more insight as to what their process is. And then when there's issues with it, or, then I just feel like I have a better understanding of what happened, like what the process is.
One other piece that you'll have, another tool, is mid-year, typically right at the beginning of January, I will typically send out a survey to staff members to evaluate their administrators. So that will be done for assistant principals and principals, and I'll work with those principals on that. But I also send one out to all staff members for myself. And that's an anonymous survey that allows any staff member to give that feedback. You as a board will see mine. All of those results will be delivered to you most often before I even see them. You'll have them. I've got to work through that process here, but the way I've done it in the past is that those results go directly to the board. So that'll be another piece that you just have to see. This is how the staff is seeing me as the leader in the district.
I think that adds a level of transparency and trust that's going to help a lot just in the community and in the schools. That's great.
Okay, that's all I have.
All right, appreciate your work there. Next section is policy review. We have first reading, 2 items. First one is the facility rental policy. I know we've been working on this a little bit, but.
And then I'm just going to turn these policies over to Lisa. If that's
Sure. You know that we've been working through policy over the last year. We got through quite a few sections. The rental facility policy, what you'll notice on there is it just hasn't been updated for quite a while. And some of the practices has kind of shifted. And as we're looking at new ways to involve community back into the buildings, we really wanted to bring this to your attention and see if there's items in there that you would like revised, discussed, just any kind of feedback you would have for us, especially on that policy as we look moving forward with it, revisions that we are going to make.
I just would love to see it as easy as possible for our community members and our taxpayers to be able to use our buildings. I mean, they're paying for those buildings, and if we can keep our local sports teams and local dance teams and, you know, get them in there and keep them in Middleton, I think that would be fantastic.
Nothing else, even an outreach to encourage more usage.
Yeah, and responsibly, like I understand some of our equipment is expensive and we can't afford to replace all that stuff, but
Some of those teams donate to the schools though, then actually a lot of times the coaches buy that. I mean, that's a lot of the stuff that's in there, the balls and.
well, it's more like
those
the
are probably
auditorium, like the sound
donations.
system
Well,
and
yes,
stuff. at
well,
the
that
auditorium.
too.
Well,
Yeah.
just like if it gets ruined, we don't always have the funds to replace it.
No.
But I'm just saying-
Is the auditorium, would you want to have something more specific for the auditorium then?
This is a pretty broad overview, and then when you get to like our rental facility sheet and some of that, it does specify more towards which facility they're looking to utilize. And so that does take into consideration some of that usage with the auditorium, what the cost might look like if there's damage or different situations like that.
Okay.
Like I like some of the flexibility in here, but I wonder if that, because it's left up to interpretation, is there a lack of consistency? Like, do we need something that's a little more?
Well,
Well,
yes.
and that's one of the things that we're looking for is each school, you know, right now they get sent to the school and they talk to the school about it, but then they have a different experience at each school on how willing they are to help or what they charge or what they don't charge or will let you go. And so this is a big part of this is to have that consistency within so that whatever experience they had at one school is the experience they have at another. And to make sure that our like for instance, the auditorium, there are some of the things that if a person goes and uses the auditorium that we will not, we're not going to train somebody to come in and use the facilities. We're going to have to provide that. So we may need to extend the costs to the person using that for that person to be there. But I don't think anybody has a problem with something like that. But if it's a nonprofit organization and there are people here in Middleton, we don't want to be doing more than what we have to. It's not meant to be a money-making scheme. It's, sorry, I shouldn't even say
Just to
scheme. It's
protect
not a
our
scheme.
assets mostly.
Yeah, it's just, we want people to use our facilities, but we want to make sure that those facilities are kept safe as we're doing them. So we just want to make sure that we're being consistent. And so any other input that you have just helps us as we move to that next reading of the policy, because we'll go in and start tinkering and addressing these issues that you might bring up.
Because for me, it's just fees. How are you going to determine that?
Well,
As far as in the policy itself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think it'll
You
be,
just leave it open like that, so then it's,
I think it's going to be determined in 2 different categories for one. I mean, and we'll work through it a little, but you'll have the nonprofit
Okay,
and then you'll have for-profit. Because if they're coming in for-profit and they're
Yes.
running,
and I'm
their business
fine with
there,
that. That's
then
fine with
I
me.
think we should
Charge
be
'em.
charging them a different amount than what we would for a nonprofit organization.
Thank you.
And so that to me is the biggest
That's clear.
piece.
Okay.
And then we'll just have to come, for the nonprofit, it's gonna be cover costs. As long as we can cover costs but if it's, I'm not even talking about lights.
Oh, and I know there's a section in there about janitors.
Right.
I mean, I've swept a few floors for the janitor, just so we could use the gym, which is
Right.
fine. I mean, but not everybody will do that, so.
Yeah, so those, covering the cost for nonprofit and then having a fair amount, what would be, I don't think it has to be more, but it would be comparable to what they might be charged somewhere else
Okay.
for the for-profit. That's kind of a general thought, but that we'll work through that on each place.
Does the Teachers Association usually look at these, get advice on it as you guys work through it or after, or how does that work?
When we were working with the committee, they were sitting on the committee. If it's a
Let's see,
situation
there's
for
a
outside the
section in
committee,
there
work,
for them.
we'll collaborate with them and make sure we get their input as well.
Thank you.
Anything else on this one?
No,
Title IX?
Yep. So in revising our 3,000 policy last year, we were able to update our sexual harassment policy, but some of the procedures that attached to it, we hadn't got to the point where we had updated all of those to the new procedures. And so what you're seeing in front of you is just the updated 3085, which is the policy. There's a procedure that's attached to it, which is the much lengthier document. And then the actual complaint form that would attach with that as well. And so this would just be revising these, get these up to date, and make sure that we have those procedures as well within our manual for everybody to have access to as well.
And then once we have those procedures in place, we've got to make sure that we are communicating those out to parents, students, and teachers. All of those people need to know what their options are if they feel like.
would that go in a handbook? How would you do that?
It can be a handbook, it can be on the website, it can be providing training night. I mean, for the teachers, we can do that within some of our professional development. But I've seen it done where they opened it up to allow parents to come in. You don't get a lot of participation, but it's at least for those that are interested, can come in and have questions answered about Title IX and how it works.
Did we used to have, or do we have a section on the website that is for Title
We
IX?
do.
Okay, I was gonna say, I thought I remember seeing it on there, but okay.
It's just not
So will
the main
this
tab
be up,
anymore.
this will update it to that and we'll keep that there? Okay.
And mainly, we just wanted to be very transparent about our procedure that we'll follow and make sure everybody understands what that outline looks
Right.
like.
That's good.
And you'll notice on the procedure document, I did leave things highlighted, and that's where decisions will need to be made between now and our next reading as far as how we narrow those down. So I just wanted you to pay attention that those are choices that we'll be making within that as well as we continue to revise it.
When we get to that point, will you guys have recommendations
Yes.
for us as far as those highlighted? Okay.
Perfect.
Anybody else? With that, we'll move to possible action items. So you guys heard a discussion earlier about these two readings, so we can move to adopt these first readings. Then we have a second
Move
reading.
them to a second
So
reading.
moving to the second reading. So we entertain a motion to have a second reading at the next meeting.
So I'll make a motion to move the rental facility and the Title IX procedures to a second reading.
I'll second.
Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye, motion carries 5-0. I would assume we'll take a motion to approve Kennedy's evaluation process.
I will make a motion to approve Superintendent Moore's. Sorry, not yet. Almost, not even close.
You wanna be?
It's worth a second try, right?
Not even close.
Of the golf course, maybe?
Yeah, superintendent golf course. Superintendent Key's evaluation process and IPLP.
I'll second
Any more discussion? All those in favor say aye.
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 Aye, motion carries 5-0. Do we need a motion? Can we make a motion? We had a discussion. It's not on the it's not listed as an action item on the vans, or do we just have you doing that? when you come
Yeah,
back?
I do that, and then the motion will be, the action item will be next month,
Okay,
when we've got some pricing.
okay, so you're gonna do that. We can do that afterwards. All right, with that, we'll hear from anybody who's signed in, limit of 3 minutes. Who signed in?
Thank you.
With that, we'll call the meeting to as adjourned.
I make a motion, we adjourn.
We just adjourned it.
No, I'm making a motion. All right, fine.
We're done. Thank you much.